Good afternoon to all of you, and I hope all of you, along with your loved ones, are safe and well in this incredibly difficult set of weeks. For those who don't know me, I'm Odette Lino, the Marianne D. Short Esquire Dean here at Boston College Law School, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy's program on transgender rights, state and national developments, which is co-sponsored by BC Law Lambda. Across the country, as I know all of you know, we're witnessing a ferocious backlash against the rights of marginalized communities, among them the LGBTQ plus community. Last year, as many of you know, the Supreme Court, in the 303 creative case, held on First Amendment grounds that a Colorado website designer could decline to create a same-sex wedding website. This year, we're watching the case of Tingley versus Ferguson, in which the Supreme Court will decide whether statewide bans on conversion therapy should be upheld. And I know we're going to be hearing more about the Tingley case during today's conversation. In 1971, Lambda Legal was founded as a 501c3 nonprofit to protect the rights of the LGBTQ plus community. And Lambda actually had to sue on its own behalf to be recognized as a charitable organization. Its initial incorporation filings were denied as neither benevolent nor charitable in purpose, and without a demonstrated need for its existence. The New York Court of Appeals ultimately did rule in favor of Lambda Legal. Here in Massachusetts, we're remarkably fortunate to be the home of one of the nation's most respected legal advocacy organizations working to protect the LGBTQ plus community, GLAAD. And I have the great pleasure of introducing the founder of GLAAD, today's moderator, John Ward, who is also an adjunct professor here at BC Law. In 1977, John became the first openly gay male lawyer in Boston. And 1 year later, John founded GLAAD, initially called the Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders, and now known as GLBTQ Advocates and Defenders, in response to a police sting operation targeting gay patrons at the Boston Public Library. In 1995, he had the distinction of being the first openly gay man to argue before the U.S. Supreme Court in the St. Patrick's Day parade case, where John represented a group of gay, lesbian, and bisexual Irish Americans who wanted to march in that parade. The Supreme Court there did not agree with John's argument, but he was not daunted then, and has never been since, in his nearly 50-year quest to ensure that the LGBTQ plus community is afforded equal rights under the law. At BC Law, we are committed to ensuring that all of our students feel welcome and supported, and that they feel a very real sense of belonging as an important part of our community. And I'm truly delighted that BC Law Lambda joined forces with the Rappaport Center to bring this program to us today. So before I hand over the microphone to Professor Ward, I just want to highlight also the next Rappaport program while I'm up here, which is titled Evaluating Transparency in Massachusetts Government. Especially important in this era where so many of these issues are moving to the state government as national government efforts become deeply paralyzed. So this program, which will be held in 2 weeks on November 1st, features the state auditor, Diana Zizoglio, who's going to be here, along with BC Law alum Matt Victor, who created a digital platform to ensure access to individuals so they could submit testimony on pending legislative bills. And I hope all of you take advantage of that as citizens and as future lawyers yourselves. A political reporter from the Boston Globe, Samantha Gross, will be moderating the panel. So put that in your calendars too. And with that, I want to share a big thank you to Professor Ward and to our esteemed panelists today. And just on behalf of BC Law, we're delighted to have you here.
Can everybody hear? Yes, I get you. Thank you, Dean. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. I should say that I feel remarkably welcome here teaching at BU. I say that because I'm a product of antediluvian Jesuit education, and the world has changed. in some ways. The other thing I would like to say, just take a few minutes to say, is that I don't think I'm alone in waking up just about every morning, kind of freaked out by the horror show that we humans have created for ourselves these days. And I'm fortunate in the sense that I have the time in the morning to take the time that it takes to get myself to yes, you know, through the various readings and meditations and so forth and so on. And I'm grateful for that. I mean, getting myself to yes most days. Okay, let's put it that way. But lately, one of the thoughts that's crossed my mind frequently is my husband and I recently got acquainted with a young transgender man. I know his parents, and he's an artist, and my husband is an artist. And so we had him over for dinner, and we had a lovely conversation, mostly about the artistic work of him and my hubby. And in the course of the conversation, he touched on the fear that he experienced when he was transitioning about riding public transportation. Didn't make a big deal out of it, but it kind of registered. And I also knew from his parents that his growing up was not exactly a day at the beach. Okay, so all that swirling around in my head, I remarked, and once and twice and a number of times, at the fact that he was a genuinely loving person and a very grounded person. And I said, how could they, you know, after all he's been through and blah, 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 look at him. He was wonderful. And I mean, you can't always explain why people have the grace to change and to find themselves. But I can only, in my imagination, attribute his transformation to the fact that he had the courage to see who he was and to manifest it. And he had the support of loving parents and other loving people in his life. Okay. Now, in these days when the voices of fear, greed, and delusions are strident, it's sometimes difficult to remember that the voice of truth and authenticity and love is actually deeper and more resonant. And so thinking of this young man helps me. And I hope that today's program and the lovely people who are going to talk to you and knowledgeable will help you, because we can't quit now. Okay. So with that, I'm going to introduce to you our panel. And I'll begin with Shaplaie, who comes to us from the Build program at Roxbury Youth Works. She has a wealth of experience working with children and families, including 10 years in the child welfare system, serving multiple states. She assisted in writing the law enforcement guidelines for the Boston Police Department and has trained the DA's office, the Department of Children and Families, and other state agencies. Shaplaie is a fervent advocate of serving the marginalized and has worked with cisgender boys, transgender and non-binary youth who are at high risk and or victims of commercial sexual exploitation of children. In 21, she collaborated with the Commission on a report exposing pervasive threats to the safety, well-being, and permanency faced by LGBTQ+ youth in the child welfare system and providing critical recommendations to the Department of Children and Families. In 2022, she became the Commission's executive director. Heron Greenesmith is a thoughtful, progressive policy attorney and an advocate who specializes in providing support for bisexual and pansexual communities. From the White House to conferences across the country, they speak and write about the disparities facing LGBTQ+ people and how to remedy them through policy advocacy. Currently monitoring anti-LGBTQI rhetoric as a deputy director of policy at the Transgender Law Center and teaching queerness and the law as an adjunct professor at Boston University School of Law, also known as my other girlfriend because I teach there. Greenesmith has worked in progressive advocacy spaces for over a decade with the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs, the Movement Advancement Project, Family Equality Council, and the National LGBTQ plus Task Force. Greenesmith is a graduate of the University of New Hampshire and and American University Washington College of Law. They are a former board member of the Massachusetts LGBTQ plus. It's hard to get my mouth around all those consonants. Bar Association, a former board member of the National LGBTQ plus Bar Association, a former Rockwood Leadership Institute fellow, and a returned Peace Corps volunteer. Welcome, Heron. Casey Pick is the Director of Law and Policy of the Trevor Project, the world's leading suicide prevention and mental health organization serving LGBTQ plus young people. And I should mention that Jansen Wu, who for many years was the Executive Director of GLAD, has now joined them I can't remember what you told me you did, but it sounded good. Senior moments. Okay.
We only poach the best.
I'm sorry?
We only take the best.
Right, exactly, right. She works to advance state and federal policies that support LGBTQ plus young people in crisis, educating policy makers and the public about LGBTQ plus young people and their mental health issues. She also writes and coordinates amicus briefs, collaborates with state and local advocates, and testifies in support of legislation to protect LGBTQ plus young people. So I think we'll perhaps begin at the other end of the table with you, Casey.
So I was told to prepare a few minutes just to explain a little bit about what I do, and you just got the basics of it from the resume. At Trevor, we are the leading organization providing crisis intervention and suicide prevention services for LGBTQ young people. So for 25 years, that has meant that when an LGBTQ young person finds themselves in need of somebody to hear them, somebody who will understand, they can call us. And in recent years, we've been able to add telephone, text and chat to the telephone services, 24/7 confidential and accredited. But that's not all that we do. We also have a research branch that surveys tens of thousands of LGBTQ young people under the age of 25 to better understand the challenges they're facing, the state of their mental health, what brings them joy, what makes life harder. And as part of our advocacy team, it's my job to take that information, what we know from the crisis lines, what we know from our research, what we know from all of the different ways that we engage and hear from LGBTQ young people, and bring that into the policy arena, whether that be local, state, federal, or even sometimes even international policy. I find myself engaging with all three branches of government, judicial through the amicus briefs, as mentioned, and also trying to educate and advise judges when I get the chance. Working with the executive branch when we are fortunate enough to have a friendly executive and agencies that are committed to do things like improving data collection so that we can see and understand our community better and know where those challenges are so that we can get them the resources that they need and deserve. And what I spend very much of my time doing lately, which is focusing in on this wave of legislation targeting our community, particularly at the state level. At Trevor, we tracked something like 650 pieces of legislation introduced this year targeting LGBTQ people. More than half of those bills in some ways targeted youth. More than half of those total bills targeted trans or non-binary people. So we've got a lot to talk about today, and I'm eager to share what we're doing here at Trevor and how hopefully as members of the legal profession, you can help in the future and even today.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So I am the incoming Deputy Director of Policy at the Transgender Law Center, and I just recently left political, oh my God, I already can't remember where I worked. That's a good sign. Political Research Associates, where for 5 years, I was a senior research analyst looking at the anti-transgender right wing. So the past couple of years have been truly extraordinary at my work at PRA. I encourage everyone to follow Political Research Associates. We research the right wing along a number of axes. I have colleagues there who focus on Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and anti-abortion movements, right-wing sheriffs, the Christian right. So if any of that is interesting to you, please follow PRA. It's going to be difficult for me to tell you what I'm doing in my current role because I've been there for 12 days. So as Casey was saying, I'm still in the counting days section. So just had a conversation this morning with one of my new colleagues talking about how we're going to be moving into both reactive and proactive advocacy work. Casey and I have been working together for 15 years, doing a lot of the same work at the local, state, and federal levels, more international work, and really amazing work, if I might add. It's an honor to be sitting next to you. So rather than telling you what I will be doing, I'll tell you a little bit about what I have been doing at Political Research Associates over the past 5 years. And then maybe when I have time for some responding to more questions, I can kind of fill out a little bit of what we've been seeing. But I'll just say now that I've been watching as the Christian right amasses power and connections through a variety of techniques in order to gain, in their words, dominion over certain areas of public life in the United States. And one of the ways that they're doing that is by enforcing gender essentialism upon the United States and upon the globe. I have a colleague, I tend to speak in parentheticals, and I just did a parenthetical to a parenthetical. My colleague, Fred Clarkson, if you're interested in learning more about the Christian right, is, I would say, one of the foremost experts in the nation right now. So that's Fred Clarkson at Political Research Associates, who's looking at how the Christian right has been building power and succeeding in gaining dominion over areas of public life in the United States. And when it comes down to gender essentialism, it is a crucial part of Christian right theology that gender essentialism be imposed upon the world. I'm going to say some things so that Christ returns. I'll just say that right now. It sounds strange for me to say that, but that is truly what the Christian right believes, that we need to impose gender essentialism upon the world so that Christ can return and see a godly earth that he left. That gender essentialism includes precepts like that there are only men and women, that those men and women were born that way and must remain the way that they were assigned at birth by their doctor, that marriage can only be between a man and a woman, and that sex is reserved only for procreative sex within a marriage of a man and a woman. I've spent the last 5 years researching the rhetoric in the communities who are spreading that rhetoric, and I'm very happy to talk more, but I want to make sure you have time to meet Shaplaie too. She's also really fucking cool.
Hi, everyone. I recently learned that Heron and I grew up on the same street, literally.
We do not know each other.
Just met today.
Where was this?
Providence, Rhode Island.
Oh, that's what I did know.
It's all very interesting. So Shaplaie Brooks, I am the executive director of the Mass Commission on LGBTQ Youth. We are the only independent state agency dedicated to this particular piece of work in the country, which is sad, right? But we have a large job to do, right? And unfortunately, we're really just representing Massachusetts. So what we do at the commission, we do a number of things. We have a partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And in that partnership, our Safe Schools program that really started because of the high suicide rates of children attending school. And most of those were LGBTQ youth. At this time, we started as a governor's commission. And so from there, we've evolved. We have the Safe Schools program. We have within that the GSA Council, where we have hundreds of youth. Actually, we're now at past 1,000, so thousands of youth, right? To come to their GSA meetings. We have a leadership summit every summer where we teach youth facilitation skills and how to write testimony. We teach them about policy. We teach them about legislation, all of the process, right? And how they can participate in the process. They come to the State House with us. They testify with us. And it's really youth-led and adult supported. We also have the state side, where we provide recommendations to 22 state agencies on the gaps in service provision for LGBTQ youth. Some of those state agencies you've heard about, DCF, DYS, DMH, and the list goes on and on. One in particular is the Office of Refugees and Immigrants. And I speak a lot about intersectionality. And when you think of LGBTQ youth, we think of, yes, the QT BIPOC youth, which are queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, people of color. But also, are we really thinking about youth with an additional intersecting identity who are immigrant, right? And so that's just a little fact that I like to always throw in there, because we're not often thinking about all LGBTQ people. And so with that, we also we testify, we help to write bills, I'm often looking at bills like the Gender X bill, and how can we make sure that is intersectional? How can we make sure that Black and brown people feel protected, right? And that they're not putting an X marker on their ID as an additional way to be discriminated against, right? So what things can we put in place? How can we be proactive in order to protect them? So that's just some of the work that we do. And we've taken our work national. I'm also the chairperson for the NAACP's LGBTQ cabinet. That is an interesting position there, because it is very religious, even though they don't say that. But it is, and as a preacher's kid and a church girl myself, growing up, it is fun to put people up there a little bit. So that's just a little bit about what we do, a little bit about myself, and I guess we're gonna get into the question.
Thank you. If I may, I'd like to begin with you, Shaplaie. As my students will tell you, the drum that I beat early and often is precisely intersectionality. My feeling has always been that the struggle for queer rights, if it's not connected to the larger struggle for human liberation, it's kind of a dead end. And could you say some more about how you look at the issue of intersectionality, the work that needs to be done, and what would be most helpful? And included in intersectionality, let's include young people, I mean, because that's one of the burdens that's often not looked at that way, but can also be really burdensome, especially now when these laws, one of their aims seems to be to take away agency. So anything you'd like to say on that topic? I think we'd all be very interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a mother, right, of a now 20, almost 21-year-old, I can say adultism is alive and well, right? My son often tells me, like, I am grown now. And I'm like, are you? But anyway, so in terms of intersectionality, I think it's always very interesting to me when we think of the different intersections and how those compounding identities really affect one person. And I often say, if you free the most marginalized person in the room, you'll free everyone. And so if you're looking at what we're doing in any job, whether you are a policymaker or you run a state agency or you're a case manager, right? If you're looking through the lens of it with an intersectional lens of freeing the most marginalized person in the room and identifying who that person is, and most often you won't see them in a room. And when I say who's the most marginalized person in the room, they may not be in this room. It is your Black trans woman who may have maybe neurodivergent, may have a visible disability, or one that isn't, right? And so we can go on and on and on and pack all of these things on this person, but that's the most marginalized person in the room. And the things that you're doing should be able to, should be equitable for this one person, and then everyone else can receive that equitably, right? That's often the drum that I beat. And so what work can be done? I think, again, it's looking at how well, first we need to figure out what is the issue. If we're looking at young people, we can't walk into a space with young people and just look at the people who are there. Who is experiencing abuse and neglect? Who is dual system involved, and how are those systems affecting the lives of this one person? And so when we're doing the work, right, we're looking at that person and thinking, this may be a white person, right, who is dual system involved. Cool. How can we help this youth? But then there are many youth just like this one who have an additional intersectional identity that we need to even think even further, and how can we make it more equitable for them? So the work that can be done is to think of all the ways in which you can free that one person, and then everyone else becomes free. I would definitely say that, and I think we often struggle as adults with adultism and making sure that we're supporting youth and not speaking for youth. And so when you think of things like the Healthy Youth Act, right? It was a novel idea to bring youth into the coalition to tell us what they need with their sexual education. Because we're coming in, we think we're doing this really great thing, as we often do. But if you don't have the people in the room that you're speaking of, really, who are you doing the work for? So.
Thank you. One of the things that I may be hearing you say is the importance of each of us really and truly doing the work that it takes to educate ourselves. And it does take work, doesn't it? I mean, yeah. And yeah, I think sometimes we underestimate, I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have this fantasy that I can save the world and that's my job, and I can't, of course. But I underestimate the value of just allowing my consciousness, you know, and admitting that it, you know, I didn't come from the stork, an anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic person, you know, and it's taken some work, and it's a work in progress. And that it mysteriously, and this is not woo, it mysteriously spreads, doesn't it? I mean, thank you. Heron, I'd like to ask you to talk about anything you want to, but don't forget to talk about tingling, okay? Oh, is that Casey? I'm sorry. Okay, good. We'll get to you. All right. So don't talk about tingling.
The one thing I know nothing about. Anything?
Anything.
All right, here we go.
And I'll nudge you as you go.
Okay, I'll talk about gender ideology, because I think that gender ideology is a phrase and a framework that many of us need to be exposed to. And though I'm not going to place a political ideology upon you, but many progressive people in the United States are not familiar with the term gender ideology, and it is a term that many Christian conservatives and people and Christian right advocates not only know, understand, recognize, but have taken into their own theology and their own understanding of how gender essentialism is important to bring back Christ's return. So gender ideology is a term out of the Vatican in the 90s that was a reaction to advocacy for stronger protections for folks accessing abortions at the UN level, not accessing the abortion at the UN level, obviously, you understand. And work on anti-violence advocacy, and then work for LGBT folks. The Vatican issued a statement, 92 perhaps, stating that all of this advocacy was so-called gender ideology permeating into our public life, our private life, and destroying the family from within. So gender ideology is a name for anything that can be seen as destroying the natural family. And by natural family, I mean the two parents, cisgender, married, have children who are both their own biological children. The nuclear family is a better way to put that, since what is natural and what is unnatural. Gender ideology has grown and is such a excellent form of passing on this particular ideology, not to repeat a term, that it has been used to refer to, for example, migration, that migrants are bringing gender ideology into Western Europe, for example. You can hear the racist dog whistles, obviously, behind that. We're talking about non-Christians, right? We're talking about non-white people who are bringing gender ideology. So gender ideology has been used to refer to Islam, used to obviously refer to feminism, used to refer to advocacy for abortion, advocacy for LGBT people, safe schools advocacy, suicide prevention, gender ideology, and the conspiracy theories that it brings along with it have been used to rally a collection of both Christian and secular right activists around anti-LGBT advocacy. Everyone's just looking at me. Jair Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, came to the White House in 2021, I think, and stood next to President Trump and said that he and the president agreed on a number of things. And this was in Portuguese. Trump was nodding along because he does not understand Portuguese. And Bolsonaro said that one of the things that he and Trump agreed on was gender ideology. Gender ideology is not a phrase that you ever hear from American politicians. You'll hear things like transgender ideology, maybe, transgenderism, you'll hear other things around there. When you hear those, now you know what to listen for. You're listening for the conspiracy theory, gender ideology that came out of the Vatican in the 90s and refers to any advocacy or really anything. I am also gender ideology. You are gender ideology. We are all gender. The real gender ideology was what we found along the way. So I wanted to build that framework to show you that the anti-trans movements that we're seeing here in the United States are connected inexorably with international movements, anti-trans international movements, but also very conservative religious movements that are funded at the level of billions of dollars here in the United States and abroad. So when I talk about whom we're up against when we are freeing queer people, I want to make us both sad and happy, make us both afraid and confident. We have freedom behind us, buoying us, filling our sails, but we also have an enemy who is far more well-funded than we are and far more well-connected than we are. And so we have to have our eyes open and to understand where the ideology and the rhetoric is coming from, who is spreading it and why, and what their end goals are. I'll stop there for gender ideology.
Talk a little bit about the mental health aspects of the anti-trans things. Was that also?
That's my territory.
Let me move to you.
Sure, where would you like me to start?
I'll get back to you. I've got some questions for both of you.
Yeah.
You have to, I can set it all down. After a certain age, you get the gold card. You can make all the mistakes you want. So go ahead, Casey. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, Heron, I'm actually really grateful for you laying that out, the ideological components of this, because it is absolutely connected to what I'm seeing on the grounds when I travel to states to testify against actual legislation. When it comes to just answering the question, where did all this come from? Why are we facing this massive national wave? And really, it's been wave after wave after wave. I could point back to 2017 when we started seeing a wave of bathroom bills. Look back 2-3 years ago when the real trend was going towards bans on transgender women and girls primarily, but largely any transgender person participating in school sports. This last year, where the focus has shifted to gender affirming care bans. Bans on, broadly it is described as hormones, puberty blockers, and surgeries, but some of these bans go so far as to ban even mental health care and support, or to threaten parents with child abuse if they facilitate even a social transition. So we are seeing nuts and bolts and like the actual bills being passed, and you are hearing the threads of this same sort of ideology that's out there. So I like to try to explain to folks that this is not a grassroots set of problems. This is not something that's coming about because, for example, transgender athletes are winning all of the state championships in all of the sports. I'm a former athlete. I phrase it as, this is not grassroots politics. This is cheap AstroTurf. But for anybody who's played on one of those cheap soccer fields, you know that it can still really hurt. So that's what we're seeing out there. And the reality of it is, at Trevor, we got engaged on these issues because we are seeing the mental health impact that, once again, being a political wedge issue, a political football, is having on our young folks. We do polling, we do our annual surveys, and youth are telling us that the fact that their rights are up for debate yet again, that this is a constant conversation from their politicians that is filtering its way down to their dinner tables, is something that's having a negative effect on their mental health. For trans youth, they're in particular telling us that it is having a very negative effect on their mental health. For a population that we know from our data, confirmed by government data, the CDC, that LGBTQ young folks are 4 times as likely to report seriously considering suicide, 4 times as likely to report an attempt of suicide, and 4 times as likely to be hospitalized or seriously injured in such an attempt, as compared to their straight or cisgender peers. So given that background framing, something that is not inherent to their gender identity or sexual orientation, by the way, something that is instead attached to the stigma and discrimination that is continued to be experienced, we know that we need to be building a society that is accepting and affirming and that is providing the resources that we need. And unfortunately, it feels like we're going in the wrong direction. As a result, those young folks that we're polling are telling us that they are feeling angry, scared, depressed, and in a word that is particularly concerning to me as a suicide prevention advocate, hopeless. So we need to be pushing back, because we know that is also something that, while there are risk factors in the world, there are also protective factors in the world. You get protective factors when, counter to a "don't say gay or trans" bill, you have a school that will include LGBTQ concerns and issues in the curriculum, where there are books on the shelves that tell our community's stories. These things are protective factors to the tune of a 20% reduction in suicide rates when you have that kind of protective factor present. And we also know that, Sondheim had it right. Children will listen. They hear you when you are speaking negatively about their identities, when you refuse to use your queer friend's correct pronouns behind their back. They hear you there, but they also see when folks fight for them. So it matters when they see us passing bans on the practice of conversion therapy. When they hear about that, that's a positive for mental health. When they see a governor, even if the veto of a bad bill is doomed, the veto effort itself shows that somebody's willing to fight for you. So these things matter, and that's where our policies and our politics can make a difference. Last thing I'll call out is, at the Trevor Project, we were proud to work with the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. For the last year, there's been a pilot program in place where if you can dial 988, that's the new 3-digit number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you dial 3, you'll be connected to specialized services for LGBTQ young folks. When I say young folks, I generally mean in their 20s and younger. So this ranges from everywhere. We get 10 and 11-year-olds who are figuring out their gender identity, or gay kids who are coming out younger these days, on up to folks in the military who are very junior in the ranks, or people who are in grad school just starting their careers. Those folks can all find that kind of support, and we got that unanimously through Congress. That's something that I like to call out and say that, you know what, there are a lot of things that are broken, there are a lot of things that are hard, but we can get common ground, we can get success, and we can have some wins. And through all of those specialized services, we know that the need is great. So far in this last year, of all of the calls to 988, 10% of them are LGBTQ and going through the specialized services. That is in line with what our data shows it likely should be, but it is disproportionate for our population. And that tells us that these bills, this legislature, this climate of hate and violence and threat that we are facing right now, that is having a tremendous negative effect on our young people's mental health. But our community is brave enough to ask for help. Let's be there and give it to them.
Thank you. What I've heard so far has sparked a lot of questions inside me, but before I get to that, are there any questions from you folks for any of the panelists?
We were gonna wait till the end, but I am happy to.
The Q&A is the fun part, bring it.
Brett, do you?
Oh, it's all right, Lizzie, I
Could
think
you
I can
speak
project.
loudly?
Sure,
Go ahead.
hi, my name's Brett, it seems like those in opposition, particularly trans rights are using really effective sort of flag in the ground statements like parental rights, which of course doesn't apply to parents who want to have gender affirming care for their kids. They seem to have some really effective messaging and political strategies. I'm wondering, as cases are playing out in the courts, if you all have any insight to what their legal arguments are, and if they're successful, and maybe what like our legal arguments are. And I mean, we're still sort of waiting to see what happens, but what are those legal arguments, and do you have any suggestions or modifications?
I can start and then you can jump on in. So what we're seeing, particularly in, let's look at the gender affirming care bans. The arguments that have been made, we actually had quite a winning streak going in district courts, where ban after ban was being enjoined just because courts were looking at the evidence that was provided of, well, are these bills being passed because it is necessary to protect young people from, quote, experimental or dangerous medical practices, or are they being passed largely out of animus, out of interest in suppressing or silencing the existence of trans folks, out of pushing a certain perspective? And for quite a while, we were winning at every district court that we were in, I think 6 or 7 cases. Unfortunately, we ran into a bit of a road bump in Kentucky and Tennessee, where rather than evaluating the evidence, the decades of experience that practitioners of mental health care and medical organizations have based their opinions on, that gender affirming care is best practice medical care. Rather than looking at that, they decided to say, well, we see a confusion. There are lots of perspectives, lots of reports, lots of claims being made out there, and we as a court, we don't want to get into deciding the science. So we're going to leave that to the legislature. So this is where it kind of pulls into what Heron was talking about, of that introduction of confusion into the record, of elevating the voices of fringe groups and fringe speakers who are claiming that there is more uncertainty about the value of gender affirming care than, say, the AMA, all the APAs, et cetera, believe there to be. And so that's where we've run into, is you've got one case reversed, Trump nominated judge. And since then, there's been kind of a coin toss of what's been happening in the courts. Our arguments have premised largely on, well, this is about the evidence, the fact of the wide-ranging animus that animates these bills and legislation. I mean, the simple fact is you often will see a gender affirming care ban passed in the same package as a ban on drag, bans on books in schools, all of this packaged together and all of it described explicitly by sponsors and supporters as being about suppressing transgender ideology. So our arguments have also been premised in equal protection, relying on Bostock, which made clear that you cannot discriminate on the basis of gender identity without simultaneously discriminating on the basis of sex. And that is the argument that we were going to continue to make as these cases progress.
That's great.
I just a follow-up question. I mean, first of all, just an observation that the courts of appeal, the 6th and now the 11th, it's all Trump judges except for one, and he was a Bush appointee. And they completely blow by the well-documented factual findings of the district courts. Isn't that I mean, that's the case. So I guess the question for all of you is, what are we going to do? Are we going to seek cert in one of these cases?
I mean, that is absolutely the challenge, and it is something that for anybody in the room who's thinking about getting into public interest law, thinking about how do you effectively do impact litigation, there does have to be an element of strategy to it. And it isn't just as black and white as what party nominated the judge. It is important to note that we have also gotten wins from judges nominated by Republican presidents. We've even gotten wins out of Trump nominated judges. So that's not all it is, but you do want to look at where the patterns are. And for example, right now, I will draw your attention to the Fifth Circuit, which is a deeply challenging space. As diplomatically as I can. So you will see that sort of thing. And as advocacy organizations, as we collaborate to try and present ourselves with the best case possible, sometimes that is something we have to think about. And we know that the opposition is absolutely doing so, sometimes intentionally passing their most egregious bills in districts where it is hardest for us to challenge.
Are there other questions from out here before we continue? Yes.
Thank you. I never need a microphone, but thank you. Thank you all for being here. This is a really great panel. Well, many of us, myself included, will enter private practice after being here and might not have careers as full-time public interest litigators or doing this type of work, but we will have opportunities to do pro bono or community involvement work. Are there organizations or ways that you've seen lawyers kind of use their ability, the resources at their places of employment most effectively, whether that's direct representation of queer people experiencing hardships in communities, working with organizations like Trevor? Like, what are some of those opportunities that we can be helpful, even if we don't maybe have a full career in this space?
I mean, I can start with saying that you should be a part of coalitions. And when you think of like the commission, we're a 50-member body. And everyone comes from, the commissioners come from all backgrounds. So to have someone who is inclusive in their practice and has an inclusive lens is like a gold mine for us, right? So I would definitely say like the commission, I'm sorry, it's a shameless plug, but we need everyone and we need them younger and younger. So yes, definitely the commission, GLAD, there are so many places, but I would definitely say very much grassroots coalitions. You're making sure that you're in meetings whenever you can. Some of the community organizations, yeah, for sure.
I agree. The work is getting done.
Yeah.
The work is being done. People are doing the work. People are living the work, and we need folks to support work already being done. So join the commission. There's a couple small organizations here in Massachusetts, the Mass Trans Political Coalition, the Trans Emergency Fund, TEF.
Yep, TEF.
Trans Emergency Fund is also always looking for folks to volunteer and to give money. LARED Network. LARED is the anti-violence, both programs and advocacy for anti-violence survivors.
And I've got plenty here. So the first and most obvious is I coordinate Trevor's amicus brief program. And so we are filing briefs across the country regularly. I've got 3 or 4 going at a time, and I partner with folks at large law firms because they are the ones who are licensed in those states. It's where I can go and say, hey, I need a brief for Florida on Medicaid issues and access to gender affirming care. Can we get this done? And by the way, it has to be done in 3 weeks. And they've got the ability to pull in half a dozen associates to get that done for me and get it done at a quality level. So I always like to tell folks there is no hierarchy of holiness when it comes to your job description. The fact that I am director of law and policy for the Trevor Project doesn't make me any more useful to the movement than, frankly, the associates who are working on those briefs for me. So you can do some great work there. Other things that you can do, and this is one of those spaces of just get creative and think about it, of where your role may be. I spend a fair amount of time these days talking to lawyers, law firms that are ERGs, just trying to do some education work on what's going on with these issues. And some of that boils down to you all will represent clients and they will make choices based on your advice. For example, if you are the attorney for a hospital where gender affirming care for minors has been banned in that state, are you going to advise your client, the hospital, don't do gender affirming care for anybody? Because some attorneys are out there and it's making a major difference for even transgender adults. So in that element of, represent your clients well, do your job well. But when you're thinking about how much of a buffer zone am I going to build in to accommodate the intolerance of the state legislature, keep your values in mind and give your clients the chance to be brave where they can. Another thing that comes to mind on this, you're going to be trained in how to make an argument, in how to speak publicly, and how to engage. And that means if you choose to engage with, say, your local school district, when they're having hearings or meetings talking about, are we going to ban this book that's been challenged? You've got the ability and the skill set to make a clear argument, to articulate, hey, there's a thing called the First Amendment, it exists. And just to be there in the room when it sometimes can be overwhelming, the number of folks who have heard these conspiracy theories, who've gotten information from groups like, Moms for Liberty, Libs for TikTok, all of that, those social media groups that are spreading this misinformation and fear. You can be a voice of rationality in that room. And that might be the thing that makes a difference for that school board. Just being able to say, we heard from somebody who made a good case gives them cover. And every politician at every level ever wants cover. And then the last thing I'll throw out here is, as attorneys, we often have a certain amount of financial privilege. And I can definitely tell you that, especially in the climate we're currently in, the attacks on businesses and corporations for being allies to LGBTQ folks, your LGBTQ organizations are feeling that in our budgets. So as folks who may well have financial privilege, donate, find an organization and support, throw fundraisers, get your firm to make it part of their employer match. You've got the ability to be the lifeline for the folks who are doing this 24/7.
Casey, I'm a magpie and I steal good lines, and one of it goes into my chapbook of good lines is, what was it, the hierarchy of holiness? Or I'm going to put that in next to, there's no such thing as the oppression Olympics. Okay. And just one more thought before I ask for more questions. I think if each of us can find a way to demonstrate to our coalition partners that we are real and that it's costing us something and we're doing it, they'll get it. I mean, I have faith that they'll get it, okay? And I think the queer movement, if I may say so, has not always in every department stepped up to the plate in that respect. And I think it's on us as queer people and allies to keep moving that forward. There's 100 ways to plow and kiss the ground, but make sure that you're doing it somehow or other. Anything else on the coalition building or the way forward in dark times? Questions?
Coalition building, I'd say, be on the lookout for your surprise allies.
Thank
for your
you.
folks who
Right.
you may not have seen coming. We've had some conversation about, challengingness of certain religious movements in this country. Likewise, you could also find allies there who have access to places that we don't always get into. And like I said, give people the chance to surprise you with their bravery. So challenge folks. Right now, we're in a situation where I look at the various different sanctuaries that LGBTQ young folks have been able to carve out over the years, whether that be their healthcare provider, their school, their online refuges. And I'm seeing all of those under legislative attacks. And the response that I say to that is, well, that's going to be what it's going to be, but we can build out sanctuaries in our communities as well. And sometimes that might mean your LGBTQ community center. That might mean, if you're a parent, make your basement the place where the queers hang out. If you can be the place where they come up after school for cookies and video games, then you're winning and you're making a difference. But it can also be faith communities. The stories of synagogues using their experience as places that are under attack and under oppression to be like, you know what? We are a safe place. We've already got security in place. Come hang with us. That matters.
Thank you. Questions, other questions from the audience? Yes, hello.
How do you take care of yourself?
I'll go first.
Please.
Very good question.
I'm going first because I don't. And I burned out last year. Officially, I went to a psych program. I have done it. It happened. I burned out all the way until there was nothing left. In fact, there was emptiness and they needed to get filled with something. And so I was able to find support. But y'all don't do it. It's not worth it. This is the single body that you get. Truly, you don't have another body or a brain to go into if you use this one up. Do less. I'm not exaggerating. We need you to do less now so that you can do more in the long term. If that means taking one less class next semester, if that means dropping a club, and that means that you can do what you need to do to be here in 50 years, I want you to have made that decision. I don't want you to not be here in 50 years. I'm going to be here in 50 years because I have a network around me now. And I have people who support me and I know what I need to do. And I'm like taking DBT and dialectical behavioral therapy. It's great. Make those choices now because this isn't going to stop. It hasn't stopped. There was no point at which we were free. I don't know what the cavemen felt about queer people. One of my friends has a tattoo that I love that says, it's from, I think the Talmud, says, you know, we don't have to finish the work, but nor can we abandon it. What that means to me is I'm not the savior. I'm just a foot soldier. We are all foot soldiers. And we just need to keep working. And when we get tired, we can sit on the side of the road and someone else can walk for a little bit. But we need to be able to recognize those signs in ourselves so that we can be here in 50 years. So that we can be here like John is here. So that we can be working across generations to continue to have, we need the resources and the memory and the institutional knowledge that we're all going to have in 50 years. So that being the baseline, the worst happened to me, well, almost the worst, not the worst, and I'm here. So I'd love to hear from the others about.
Shaplaie, you want to go? Because I can definitely
take care of yourself.
Yeah, so I was gonna go last.
You want, I can.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So I'll start with the nuts and bolts. I am fortunate that for the last 5 years, I work for an organization dedicated to mental health, and they practice what they preach. It shouldn't be as hard for them to do it, though. I mean, literally, Trevor has had to fight it out with insurance companies to ensure that mental health care is treated the same as physical health care in terms of copay for employees. But they did it. And so I would say, as you're going into this work, frankly, whatever kind of work you're going into the legal profession, there are reasons why we are infamously overrepresented for substance use and stress, burnout, depression, all of that. Take a look at what the benefits are that your employer offers. And, you know, mental health is critical. So that's part of it. It is also part of the intake interview at Trevor is the question, so what does your self-care look like? They want us to know that they value self-care. They want us to build that out, build out your network, have practices in place, take your PTO. You've earned it, it's yours, you deserve it, and it's what's going to let you do this logistically. That said, I'm not going to lie, much like Heron, this is hard. And I had it come home to me real hard 4 years ago when I had a stroke. I was 35. And, you know, is it directly associated with the stress of this work? We don't know, but, you know, a lot of doctors suggested it might be. So that was when I really started taking pains to make sure that I had in place better self-care practices. I made sure that sleep was a priority. It matters. You might be young enough now to get away with 4 hours of night. don't get into that practice, because one day you won't be able to. Having workout routines and having that network of folks who are there for you. This last week, theoretically, October is the off season for what we do. But state legislative sessions are, most of them are in session from January through May. June happens, which is an amazing opportunity for the message to get out on LGBTQ issues. It is also grueling and grinding exhaustion for professional advocates in that space. So this is the season when I'm doing things like this, public education, speaking to folks. This week, I live in DC. Yesterday I was in New York. Today I'm here. Tomorrow I'll be in Los Angeles. That's just how many things are out there on it. And it's exhausting. And in the middle of travel for all of that, I got the call from a state equality group leader from a state that I traveled to 4 times in 4 weeks this session. I got really connected into that community, helping them to frame their talking points, fight back against the second most bills of any state in the country. I love that community. And I got a call this week from the state equality group leader saying that they had lost 3 trans folks to suicide in a week. And they wanted to know if we had any resources or advice on how to support the community. And I gave them what resources we had. I connected them into the chapter of the American Foundations for Suicide Prevention. I got information from our crisis services team, the folks who are actually the heroes and experts. And then I got off the phone and I cried. And that is real, and that's part of the work. I texted my pastor, who prays for me every time I go to testify somewhere. And I scheduled dinner with one of my best friends in the world when I get to Los Angeles, where she's just going to listen to me. And that's what it looks like sometimes to do this. And it's exhausting. And we have peers and colleagues, but it's a lot more sustainable now than 5 years ago when I tried to do this all being the tough guy, the stoic, letting everybody think that it didn't get to me. It does. And the beauty of working in this space, though, is the community of other advocates you get to collaborate with. Folks like Heron, we've been friends for 15 years. I don't know how I do this if I don't have them standing beside me.
So I would say all of the things that my colleagues here have said, and as a Black queer woman, yeah, I don't know that rest is something that I experience. Someone asked me a couple of weeks ago, when do you rest? And I asked, and then I just started crying. I asked, what does rest feel like? Like, what is that like in your body? Like, what does it mean to just like nothing? Like, there's nothing on you. My children, right? My kids are queer, right? And they go through their own things, right? So I can say that as I navigate the world as a queer woman, there are all of these other things that I have to figure out. So there are times where I'm supposed to be resting and taking a day, and I'm watching like Real Housewives of Atlanta or something, right? But I find myself like this, and my jaws are clenched, right? And so I won't lie to you, being in spaces like this where there aren't many people who look like me, right? I'm often in that space, and I am often speaking for QC BIPOC people, and I am not a trans woman, right? And I'm often speaking for trans women. And so I can say that, of course, yes, I would love to go home and rest, but I will not lie to you, or even try to give an answer that sounds like palatable or appeasing. I do not. I don't rest. And when I do, when I do try, I often think, this is the day I'm going to rest and read Rest is Resistance. because it's on my shelf and I'm like, still haven't done that. But I mean, if I'm going to just let loose a little bit, right? Because I can do that. You see, I have like a personality, right? I sing. I grew up singing. My children sing. I enjoy those things, right? I'll have some wine. I love karaoke. And I don't sing for real when I sing karaoke because I think it's ridiculous. And so like I'll just kind of like be very nasally and just never have to like code switch and just be around people, because I believe, like, I think about self-care, I think about community care. And so making sure that people, I have those people around me. Look, my baby girl's calling me right now. You have to send it a voicemail. But yeah, so like at the end of the day, there isn't this rest that I can't tell you that I have this self-care regimen, but what I can tell you is that I do find small moments where I can just be free in front of the people who love me. And that's what I'll take.
So one of my favorite poets, Jalaladdin Rumi, says, keep walking, but not the way that fear makes you walk. You know, I mean, this is not what we planned, but talking to a group of about lawyers and about to be lawyers, the culture that the sea that we swim in is the sea of workaholism, you know. And it takes forever, it seems, to learn that pausing, contemplating, resting, thinking aids creativity, shows answers where none will appear, and just makes you smile a little bit, you know. So there's that. How are we doing with time?
In 15 minutes.
Okay, so questions? Yes.
Right here.
And thank you all for being here. So for undergraduates at Boston College, transgender students are required to either live in a dorm with people who share the sex they were assigned at birth, or live alone in a single. There's no option for them to live with people who share their gender identity, and there's not yet a gender neutral option. So my question is, as Title IX continues to evolve in its applications to gender identity, do you think that BC's housing policy, which doesn't offer trans students the opportunity to live with people who share their gender identity, constitutes a violation of Title IX?
I taught Title IX just last week, and I teach it at BU. Now I know John. What do you think?
No, I'm writing an article on this right now, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I should weigh in with my personal thoughts at the moment. I'm just looking to get some legal expertise, because I think it's definitely questionable.
Yeah, I mean, so Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in federally funded educational programs. And the federal administrations have gone back and forth interpreting that prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex, what that means for schools supporting trans youth. I'm just trying to make sure we're all on the same page here. And between the Obama, Trump, and now Biden administrations, there have been multiple iterations of what that term sex means and what it means to make sure that school does not condone discrimination based on sex. The Obama administration understood that prohibition to mean that transgender students must be supported as their gender identity. That guidance was rescinded under Trump. And then, has it even been promulgated all the way yet? I think
No, that's not.
Yeah. Okay, I'm so glad you're here, because I would have said it has not, and then I would not have been as confident, but you take it from here.
Sure. So what we're dealing with right now is a situation of tremendous unclarity with regards to the meaning of Title IX. And some of that also just goes back to the regulations that implement Title IX themselves being shot through with some exceptions, exemptions. So it's tough to understand on that basis. But where we're at right now literally, is that you had a guidance in place, you had rules that were put in place under Obama. Follow that up with the Trump administration, pulls that back, puts in place their own set of rules for just the broader interpretation of Title IX. Because Title IX is, most folks know it for access to sports and school programs. Some folks are also aware that it will apply to things like access to dormitories. It also goes on to things like sexual harassments. So the Trump rules have been in place for that. It was one of the Biden administration's early promises was that they were going to pull back the Trump rule, put out something more in line with where the Obama administration had been at. The original promise was that that would happen in the summer of 21. Did not occur. The most recent movement we have seen on this was that they bifurcated out all of the Title IX rules they wanted to do. Sports over here, particularly trans athlete participation, and then the rest of the issue. They put out a proposed rule on athletics back in the spring, promised us, hey, in June, we'll have something for you on both rules. Oh, wait, no, we'll have something for you in October. Halloween is fast approaching, and what you are seeing now is various civic society groups, LGBT organizations, and others really trying to apply some pressure to the Department of Education. Where's our rule, dang it? So that's where we're at now. There are still open comment periods, I believe.
Author that letter? Because we were signing to a letter urging the administration. Was that you?
No, I'm actually reviewing that. That's what that I've got up here, but we are certainly involved on it. But we're trying to get, no matter, long story short, no matter who's in office, as an advocate, you're gonna have to advocate. Nobody's giving you anything unless you ask.
A couple of thoughts. Is it settled that Bostock, which forbids discrimination based on gender identity, applies to Title IX? Is it settled in the courts?
Okay, here's the fun part of that. Also, the important thing about Bostock, that merged together 3 cases, so it actually spoke to both sexual orientation and gender identity, following under sex. Traditionally, and you will see this in footnotes throughout litigation over decades, the definition of sex and the application of it in Title VII and in Title IX have walked together. Not surprising. If you're gonna have a prohibition on discrimination based on sex in your civil rights law, these two things probably should be interpreted similarly. And that's historically where it's been. Right now, where we're at is there's some argument of, well, Title VII is Title VII and that's Bostock, but you know, Title IX is a different thing. So it's kind of breaking out a little bit differently in the courts, federal district courts, state courts. So is it settled? Not as settled as it should be.
Also, I mean, is there any relevance to the Massachusetts the issue, I guess, that the reporter is that a correct description? Okay.
Oh, when you say article, you meant journalist. Okay, I thought you meant like law review.
Yes, I guess had to do with housing for transgender individuals at a certain institution, right? Does the state Massachusetts law against discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity have any application in that situation? Does anybody know?
It's interesting because I'm the Massachusetts person. I'm also not an attorney. So I can say clearly, yes, I think it is discrimination, right? I think it is wrong, right? Because I don't have any legal responsibilities here. Wrong. But then also I think Massachusetts, and I cannot answer this question, I'm so sorry. I can say that Massachusetts has many times and in many institutions created safe and affirming places for students, for its constituents, right? And so I would say there's an opportunity for, regardless of the federal piece of it, for BC to to absolutely do that. And this is something I think I would love to talk to you, because absolutely the Commission on LGBTQ Youth, it's not just 18 and under, it's 26 and under. We go under whose definition. And so, yes, let's have a conversation, because
There's a question.
the fiery areas will help.
Max, and then somebody else, yeah.
So you all have spoken a lot about the far right and the Christian right, pushing heavily back against access to gender affirming care, trans youth in sports. And I think that that's absolutely a phenomenon, but something else that I've been observing and have been really curious about is, and someone else mentioned that they have such powerful messaging, you know, protect women, meaning cis women in sports, parental rights, experimental medicine should not be, you know, used on children, whatever those messages are, seem to really be sticking also with moderate, center left, and liberal folks as well, that really do at their heart have what they believe to be the best interests of trans youth in mind, but with misinformation, end up having opinions that sort of echo that of the far right and the Christian right. So I'm curious because in my mind, those are people that are more open-minded and you can have conversations with them about some of that misinformation. What would you say to someone who, you know, really truly does at their core care deeply about trans youth, but may not necessarily have a similar approach to you all as to how to best go about that?
I train on this. So I have a training that I did for about 4 years for feminist and women's organizations to uncover and then disrupt and maybe replace anti-trans rhetoric largely within their boards, their donor bases. So I'm talking to women's and feminist organizations who, for example, have longtime donors who are white feminists, for example. So I'll define white feminist as someone who is a white person and believes, for example, that sexism is the only obstacle standing between women and gender equality and not the multiple axes of oppression that we all face, and especially those of us on multiple axes of oppression. So in the training, we talk about finding a shared value or shared values with the person with whom you're talking, and this is the basis of messaging. Find a shared value. And the values that we talk about in the training are safety, a life free from violence, and health. And find that most people share those values. We all want to be safe. We all want to have a life free from violence and be healthy. And then we talk about abundance versus scarcity. Because when you're talking about how to achieve a value or how to bring a value about, you need to talk about the resources you're using. And the anti-trans right uses scarcity and fear to describe trans people as somehow taking things from cis people. Whether that is taking away access to safety or taking away access to health. So by illustrating how scarcity mindset works, we can replace it with an abundance mindset and say that we actually understand as people who support justice for trans people, that the resources exist in the world right now to bring that about. We are just not allocating them appropriately. And if we speak from abundance, and you speak to someone, for example, who maybe is right-minded, but heard some misinformation about sports, for example, you can have a real conversation coming from a point of abundance and shared values, and say like, yeah, I would love everyone to have the opportunity to participate in sports. That sounds really awesome. And I want to make sure that everyone, especially students, especially young people who participate in sports, to be able to be safe when they're participating. And what does safety look like? Well, it looks like this. And like trans students are actually less safe than cis students are at school. And how do we keep them safer? Well, we have entire organizations who are designed to do that. To sum up, I think what I'm saying is, when faced with scarcity and faced with fear, the only antidote is abundance. There is no right messaging. There is no silver bullet. The only thing we can say is we truly believe that everyone can be safe and healthy and free from violence, and we insist on moving forward towards that vision. And if you're not here with us, then you are against us.
Sounds like Christian values to me. Did you have something to say, Max?
I don't want to take up anyone's time, but we can talk after. I'm not
Okay, great.
like that, and we share your concern.
Question, or is that?
No, I was just saying we can talk after.
Basic networking.
Any last questions? We're almost at time. Time for one more question.
Till somebody comes up with a question, I'd love to throw in my answer to that as well. Just that, I mean, in some ways, that's the hardest part of the job. It is almost easier for me to deal with the person who will call me straight up a groomer, call me a face of Satan for advocating for trans folks. Like, at least with them, I know what I'm up about. It's like, thank you very much, have a nice day, move on. But the 2/3 of adults today who say they don't know a trans person, that's a hard barrier because there's still a lot of confusion. There's a lot of misunderstanding. There's so much education left to be done. And really, they don't know that they know a trans person, but you know, that's where we're at. So a lot of the work is trying to just familiarize folks and get this out of the scary realm of ideas and ideology and back into the human, the day-to-day, the real. Part of how Trevor does this, raising up stories from actual trans youth. You go to our YouTube channel, you'll see something called Learn with Love. That is actually just a half-hour video following several different families as they went through a journey of coming to change their minds about trans folks, coming to embrace and love the trans person in their family, in their midst. And part of what's important about that is that it creates what we call in the biz a permission structure. Folks need permission to change their mind. They need to see a path to do it, and they need, honestly, the grace and the on-ramp to be able to make that happen. And sometimes walking with somebody through that, through the imperfection, through the painfully dumb questions, through the ongoing misinformation and stigma, that can be really hard. And that's where sometimes you realize, I first came to Boston College last spring to speak at Professor Lyons' class. And the topic came up there as well. How do you do this work for the long term? And sometimes you set yourself up with the network to be able to do it. But it was also kind of a brilliant thing that she raised, is that when you sign up for the military, you don't sign up necessarily for your entire life. You sign up for a stint of like, okay, I'm going to do this for 4 years and then decide, am I going to sign up again? And that's kind of where you get into this work of, I sometimes find it easier to think in those terms. I can do this for 4 years and then I'm going to reevaluate and then continue on that.
So I want to close, if I may, and say, Casey, you gave the remark that we should all give people a chance to be surprised by their bravery. So on behalf of all of us, I want to say thank you for your work, your bravery, your hardships that you have endured on behalf of so many others and yourselves. To say to you, John Ward, thank you for founding GLAAD so many years ago and being an icon in the community for so many people, helping so many people with all of your legal advocacy and your brilliant advocacy, because the work seems incredibly hard. And thank you for sharing about self-care and making sure that our students and our own community knows to take care of yourselves, because you're not going to be able to do the work if you don't take care of yourselves.
Maybe we'll plan a karaoke event.
Let's go. So thank you all of you.
Thank you.